So who is Nurse Ratched? Just what does this classic character teach us as performing artists about how to create great characters and to entertain audiences with great theater? Stay tuned. So yes, this past week my wife and I did decide to try Netflix's new series, Ratched, the origin story reimagining her character, how she got to be the way she was. And I'll be honest with you, we got 2 episodes into it and we gave up on it. Why did we give up on it so early? Well, in short, I would say that Netflix's version of this character is a case study for playwrights in how not to write great characters. We see the contrast between, on the one hand, the kind of writing of a character that won Louise Fletcher an Oscar, as well as created a film that swept all the major Oscars that year, to a different kind of writing that, in my opinion, is really ruining that great character. So what is it about this reimagined character that makes her, in my opinion, so vastly inferior to the original? Well, in short, I would say it's simply the fact that she is so unsympathetic. Now, I know what you're going to say. She's the villain. Obviously, she's not sympathetic. Now, don't get me wrong. At the very end, when McMurphy's got his hands around her throat, there's always a part of me that's rooting for him to succeed in choking the life out of her before the orderlies pull him off. And I've even heard that at the premiere, audiences even stood up and cheered for McMurphy when he began choking her. So yeah, I can see how you may say that this is the ideal origin story for a character that audiences came to hate so much, one that portrays her as always being evil like this, the one who's conniving to get her job in any possible way she can, doesn't care who she hurts, poisons an old man in the process. She has connections to the psycho priest killer, the person who encourages the guy to go in and commit suicide with the doctor's letter opener, the person who's going to plot murderous revenge on the person who ate her peach. Yeah, I get that. But the reality is that so few well-drawn characters are actually like this, where the only thing that explains their actions is... Because, yeah, interesting characters are the ones that make audiences understand, if not necessarily condone, the evil that they do. Take, for example, Shakespeare's Richard III. You can't get much more wicked than that, and yet that becomes his big challenge, the direct addresses to the audience where he explains how mean the world has been to him, and so he's going to answer in turn, and it gets the audience, we won't necessarily say on his side, but at least sympathizing in some way, makes him so much more of an interesting character than if they had no explanation at all for why he's evil. We can also compare that to the recent origin stories that were so much more successful, for like the Joker or Ephalba in Wicked. We can see a lot of parallels there, where we see characters that were once, so they're just evil. We can see how they turned out to be the way that they are. Or even, for example, Hitler. If you'll forgive me for a minute for digressing from the dramatic arts connection of this video to a practical, real-world application, we see that it's sad that so few people seem to understand the essence of human nature. They act like the lesson, to be learned by people that commit this kind of evil out of hatred. They say the lesson that we should teach our kids is that you shouldn't hate people for no reason. When if you really understand your history, understand the Treaty of Versailles, understand the origin stories of Ephalba and the Joker, you'll see the real lesson isn't don't hate people for no reason. The real lesson is that, hey, in life, plenty of people will give you a reason to hate, but that's no excuse. But anyway, back to what this teaches us about creating good fictional characters. let's get back to the drawing board about the basic elements of plot that make for an interesting story. The one indispensable thing that you need in any drama, without which it's going to be boring, nobody's going to like it, is conflict. When there's no conflict or an implausible conflict, that's when people usually are getting bored by your story. And how do you create it? The simple matter. Every character has got to have something he wants. He's striving to get it, and then there's obstacles that stand in the way. Why can't he or she get what he or she wants? Could be another character, like Nurse Ratched, it's McMurphy, is the other character with the opposite objective, so they're directly at odds, or it could be something else, anything that complicates their getting what they want. So without that, it's going to be boring. And the next thing you always need is, if you got what they want, that's good, but you got to have a reason why they want it. Their motivation. That's the other thing. So character that wants something, but you don't explain the motivation, and the motivation is poor, it's going to be better than if there's no conflict at all, but your drama is still going to be very lacking if you don't have a good reason for why they want what they want. Like an example would be given in my favorite book about playwriting, the Playwrights Guidebook by Stuart Spencer. He gives an example in one of his and one of my favorite plays, 6 Degrees of Separation. We know from the beginning what does Paul want? He wants to work his way into the house of this wealthy couple and ingratiate himself to them. We know that's what he wants, but we don't find out to the end. Why does he want that? And he runs through this all kinds of reasons. His reason could be he just wants to break in and steal their stuff. That good thing he didn't choose that one, he says, because that would not have been interesting. The reason, which they withhold till the very end, makes it a lot more touching and makes the character a lot more relatable to the audience. And even when it's an evil character, we want to see a motivation that humanizes them a little bit, because as in real life, very seldom is the only reason somebody's doing something evil, the only thought process he has to justify it is, but Nurse Ratched's motivation is such a good case study, in my opinion, for writers who want to know how to write characters that are relatable while still being the villain. And the way that we do that is by creating some way, some reason why in that character's mind, as hard as it may be for us to understand that, some way they really think that what they are doing is the right thing, that the McMurphys of the world that stand in their way are the real villains. No, they're doing a good thing. We might not be able to see it that way at all, but we got to at least see how they see it that way. As much as you may have hated Nurse Ratched's behavior that you watched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you got to listen to her carefully. Listen to her explain all of the ways why she really and truly believes that what she is doing is for the good of all the patients. She's helping them, in her opinion, by being the way that she is. Back to Hitler. As hard as it may be to accept, one can see how, in his diseased mind, he really believed that what he was doing was for the good of humanity. If you don't believe me, Google the word eugenics. Look up how many respected intellectuals in the early 20th century actually believed that a milder version of what the Nazis actually did in the Holocaust was for the best of humanity. Google Carrie Buck and the Supreme Court decision Buck versus Bell if you think only Germans were the ones that thought that way. So to close, what lessons can we take away from this? How do we as writers avoid falling into the trap of writing our villain characters in a way that they're boring? Well, the first way and this is kind of a cop-out way, but sometimes you have to go with it, is don't make them the lead character. That, of course, is what we had with the Joker and with the Wicked Witch of the West before Wicked and Joker came along. They weren't major characters, so the fact that we couldn't sympathize with them didn't matter so much. And that was the challenge of the new works. Okay, now we are making them the central character. It didn't matter that we couldn't in any way relate to them when they were a minor character, but now that they are the lead, we have to. That was the challenge that they were successful with in Wicked and Joker, and in my opinion, they were so unsuccessful with Ratched. For example, you may be writing a story based on real-life serial killer, and there's absolutely no way you can find any way to sympathize with that character or make him relatable. I think, then you might want to say, well, the story, you always have to have a conflict, but I say make the conflict not between the cop chasing him and the killer, make it between the cop and another cop who has a different idea about how we're going to catch the killer. However, I would also emphasize that in my opinion, it's not impossible as often as you might think. I know you can say, well, in real life, this is how the killer was. I'm going to have to do something that's not true in order to make him sympathetic and relatable. Well, that's another thing you'll hear in almost all introductory writing classes. That's a trap that writers fall into. They say, I have to stick with the way it happened in real life. No, you don't. The point is entertainment, and sometimes you gotta be a little bit untrue in order to make it interesting. But, if there's no way you can make the character sympathetic, that's one way you can do it. But another example of how a lot of people act like it's impossible when it's really not would be another video on this same topic that I recently saw, where this individual says that this Ratched series was doomed from the very start. Unlike these other characters' origin stories, there is no way you could go back and explain how somebody who behaves this way behaves that way in a way that makes her sympathetic. I disagree. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. So if you absolutely have to, you can say, well, I don't have to make this an interesting character because it's not the lead character. The central conflict doesn't revolve around them, so it's okay that I've not given them a good motivation. But otherwise, the other two are what we've already talked about. You can do what they did with the Joker with Afalba, explain why they've gone through a rough life. The world has been very mean to them. They want to be mean back. And of course, Richard III is also in that category. The best way is to find some kind of way to explain why this person has come to believe that the evil they are doing is actually good. If you can explain it, it's going to make an interesting character. If you can explain just how could they actually think that they're doing the right thing, and you can explore that, that makes for an interesting character. In fact, that's the very thing that I was expecting out of the Netflix series before I gave up on it. I expected that what we were going to see is that we were going to see the story of somebody who, when she's young and idealistic. She's the kind of person that McMurphy would have loved to have had in charge of him. And yet something happened. She was willing to be sympathetic. She was willing to bend the rules. And something tragic happened as a result of that. So the lesson she took away from that is, I have to be the way that we all saw her being in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's what I was expecting out of the series, and I didn't get it. So maybe that's a lesson to the rest of you guys thinking about writing characters as well as Ken Kesey wrote the original before Netflix screwed her up. So what do you guys think? Does this give you any ideas about how to write your own great characters? Give you ideas for something cool that you'd like to put up on stage or on screen? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys real soon. Take care now.